Hey, how's it going, fans? Welcome to mindforcombat. If you're new to this channel, my name's Rohan, and in this video I'm going to be taking a very in-depth look at Johny Hendricks' career, and more specifically, the rise of Johny Hendricks and the fall of Johny Hendricks, the downward spiral and the kind of shocking career trajectory that his career took at specific times in his career. Now, Johny Hendricks is an interesting one because, especially for me personally, I'm a huge fan. Well, I was a huge fan of Johny Hendricks, and I'm a huge fan of everything that he'd done and all the fights that we got to see. He was at one point almost must-watch fighter. He had this vaunted punching power where he was sliding people's bodies halfway across the cage, and it was just shocking to see from early in his career, from when he debuted in the UFC and he came in as kind of an unknown and he fought the likes of Amir Sadollah, and then he got dubbed the smiling bearded man for the finish of Amir Sadollah. Amir Sadollah was a very respected prospect at the time, just coming off winning the Ultimate Fighter, and a lot of people were very interested in seeing where Amir Sadollah can go in his career. Well, Johny Hendricks went and stopped him. Johny Hendricks started off his career 9-0. He was really a highly respected prospect. With all his wrestling accolades, he was seen as being a true representative of the world of wrestling in mixed martial arts, particularly when you consider the fact that he was a two-time state champion wrestler or national champion wrestler. I don't really know how that works. My friends in America will be able to explain that for you, but it's really crazy how highly vaunted he was, and actually his abilities in wrestling kind of translated into MMA, and where he shined shockingly was the stand-up realm, because he carried so much punching power that no one could really believe what they were seeing. His first loss came against Rick Story, who was a real veteran of the UFC already at this point, but that loss didn't hold him back, and it didn't stop him, because it was only 2 fights after that that Johny Hendricks really announced himself in the top tier of the UFC's top 5 of the welterweight division by knocking out John Fitch in about 5 seconds or 12 seconds or something ridiculous like that. At this time, now, when you're thinking about it in today's lens, maybe that's not that impressive, but when you think back then, John Fitch at the time was coming off a draw to BJ Penn being one of the best in the world at the time. He had not lost in about 6 fights, and his only loss in the UFC in his point to that to that point in his career was to Georges St. Pierre for a world title fight. After that, he had gone on to win five fights in a row or so, and he was basically the perennial or considered the top welterweight outside of Georges St. Pierre in the division. Johny Hendricks came in that fight and kind of flatlined John Fitch, and that was absolutely mind-blowing. He then moved on to fight Josh Koscheck. Josh Koscheck being on a 2-fight win streak at the time after his very own title challenge against Georges St. Pierre. And Josh Koscheck was another guy who was considered top 5 in the world. He had just beaten Matt Hughes, just stopped Matt Hughes to finish out Matt Hughes' career, and Josh Koscheck was a very respected and top tier fighter, and so he should have been. Now, this was a close fight, it was a lot more controversial, but then he still got the win, and he moved on, and the legacy, or like the image of the story of Johny Hendricks was growing each fight. His next fight, he fought Martin Kampmann. Martin Kampmann being on a good win streak at the time. Martin Kampmann was a very highly respected striker in the division, and a lot of people thought he was taking that championship run at this time, and they thought that he was on his way to getting a fight for a world title fight. And actually, shout out to Martin Kampmann, a huge fan of Martin Kampmann. I hope he's doing well in retirement. But anyways, he went and absolutely flatline bodied Martin Kampmann in a way that I had never seen. Martin Kampmann's body literally lifelessly skid across the cage, and Johny Hendricks was just put the world on notice. Everyone was looking like, what the hell is this guy? How does he hit so hard? Then came his number 1 contenders fight. After winning 5 fights in a row after his loss to Rick Story, he was matched up with former interim champion, former world title contender in Carlos Condit. Carlos Condit, a former WEC champion as well, a guy who had just given Georges St. Pierre hell. Him and Carlos Condit put on one of the best fights that you will ever see. And actually, if you haven't seen that fight, go watch Johny Hendricks and Carlos Condit. This is peak prime time Carlos Condit, who was just an absolute devastating finisher. And at all times, he's trying to finish, he's trying to flip you, he's just crazy. But there was this something around Johny Hendricks coming into that fight. And I remember watching it, looking at Johny Hendricks and thinking, this is the look of a world champion to me. And he got the win over Carlos Condit, and he moved on to fight Georges St. Pierre at UFC 167 off the top of my head, if I'm remembering that right. And the fight was there. There was all the attention. It was dubbed as UFC 167, the power to shock the world. Georges St. Pierre was fighting Johny Hendricks. Georges St. Pierre coming into this fight on an 8-fight win streak, 8 or 9 fight win streak, something ridiculous. And having had 7 world title defenses, he comes into this fight as the the top pound for pound fighter in the world. In my opinion, George St. Pierre is the greatest fighter of all time as well in mixed martial arts. And then he comes into this fight. They're fighting in Canada. It's a huge event. Johny Hendricks is there, and they put on a show, a fight that's very back and forth. A lot of people scored it to Johny Hendricks. At the end of it, in my opinion, George St. Pierre won because you've got to score it from a sporting standpoint more than an overall fighting standpoint. I'm not saying that's correct or wrong. That's just the way it is. So in my opinion, George St. Pierre won the athletic contest that night. George St. Pierre won that fight, but the fight was so close, and being that close to stopping George St. Pierre, almost beating George St. Pierre and taking the belt from him that way, while that would be an absolutely astounding accomplishment, it didn't happen though. George St. Pierre then vacates his title when it gets announced that he's going to be fighting the resurgent Robbie Lawler for the World Championship. Now, the resurgent Robbie Lawler is on a 3-fight win streak. He's coming off his 3-5 slump in Strikeforce, dropped back down to welterweight, stopped Josh Koscheck in the build-up, stopped Bobby Volker in an absolutely spectacular performance, and shocked the world by beating Rory McDonald, who was on a win streak of his own going into his fight with Robbie Lawler. And they have a back and forth war, another one of the best fights I've ever seen. And Johny Hendricks rights his wrongs from the George St. Pierre fight and walks away with the title, rightfully so. Now you've got Johny Hendricks, the successor to George St. Pierre, a guy who many people thought beat George St. Pierre, this guy with crazy wrestling accolades who's now got a world championship, this crazy left hand that's sliding people's bodies lifelessly across the cage, and this is replacing George St. Pierre, who was getting decision after decision after decision. People like me love George St. Pierre, but to the masses he may have been starting to lose his appeal because he was being dubbed as a decisionator. But now Johny Hendricks has arrived, this guy who's rattling people's skulls but has the opportunity to wrestle and can wrestle just like George St. Pierre could, but he is flatlining people. Here he is. After he beats Robbie Lawler, though, he takes off about 9 months, comes back for UFC 181, which also happened to be the night that CM Punk announced that he's signing with the UFC. That's an interesting bit of trivia there. But him and Robbie Lawler go at it again, but this time there's something a bit different about Johny Hendricks. And I remember watching that fight and turning to my little brother who I used to watch all the fights with. I tend to something's a bit odd here. And Robbie Lawler just cold stares into his soul, and he's like, Johnny's like, you want to touch gloves? Robbie doesn't even acknowledge it. Comes out there like a bat of hell. It was a really great fight. And actually, although I personally scored it to Johny Hendricks, I was really happy to see Robbie Lawler win because A, I got to see Robbie Lawler with a title, and B, this meant that the trilogy could happen. Whilst the second fight was a bit of a stinker, Johny Hendricks spent most of his time with his head in Robbie Lawler's legs. It set up a potential trilogy, and maybe we could see that magic again, and I was happy that Robbie Lawler could have that fight. And actually I hadn't written off Johny Hendricks because I had scored that fight for him, and Robbie Lawler's an animal, and what a great fight this set up. So this was a really spectacular time. Johny Hendricks comes back now after that loss, 16-3, no problem. Just lost his world title. He's still in the picture. He had a very close fight with the now current champion, and previously has beaten the now current champion, and he fights Matt the Immortal Brown. Matt the Immortal Brown, who's coming off his own loss to Robbie Lawler as well. And this is a really highly anticipated fight because Matt the Immortal Brown was on a great run prior to his loss to Robbie Lawler, and actually had a lot of fans captivated in his run. Johny Hendricks goes out there and gets the W. Now, we don't need to harper on how that fight went and all that, but the fact is he gets the W, 17-3. But now this is where things start to get really weird for Johny Hendricks, and this is around the time that USADA got introduced into the mix. I'm not blaming. Whilst I got my suspicions, and in this video I suppose it's my opinion piece, so I can say what I want, and it is of my opinion that USADA had something to do with the decline of Johny Hendricks, but there was some other stuff going on in the background. For example, we had steak business, a business failed, and that's someone who's been there when seeing a business fail, or been there having suffered the impacts of that. That is a very emotional time for a person. That does destroy you in a lot of ways, but a strong man will always rise above it, and I always seen Johny Hendricks, when he fight already, as a strong man. Johny Hendricks struggled though. There was something about him after that Robbie Lawler fight, whether that was USADA, whether it was his failing business, or whatever the hell it was going on in his personal life. He comes back to fight Tyron Woodley. He's meant to be fighting Tyron Woodley, can't even get nowhere near weight, has to get pulled out, and that fight doesn't happen. But there was something was missing about Johny Hendricks from this point onwards, that we never saw the same Johny Hendricks again. The last time that we saw the best Johny Hendricks was his first fight with Robbie Lawler, even though his second fight was close. After that, it seemed to be gone. Now began his tailspin. He went 2-6 after initially winning the world title. That's absolutely crazy. comes back and gets stopped by Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, who went on a great run. No shame in losing to Stephen Thompson. But that's just the start of things. Just the start of things. He then gets battered by Kelvin Gastelum. Loses to Neil Magny. Goes up, carries on missing weight. He's really bad at making weight. His diet's poor. His weight management is poor. Don't know what's going on with Johny Hendricks. He's got tons and tons of excuses, but he's just not the same no more. He goes up to middleweight, criminally undersized at middleweight, and fights Hector Lombard, who's slumping at the time himself, gets that win. And then we see him slumping again. We see him getting stopped by Paulo Costa. We see him getting stopped by Tim Bosch, and he's just not looking good. Johny Hendricks is gone. The decline of Johny Hendricks was something that just breaks my brain, and to this day I will never ever understand what happened to Johny Hendricks. I don't get it. I can't pretend to get it. There's no way. There's no explanation to me that would justify what happened to Johny Hendricks at that point in time. What happened next was he retired from mixed martial arts, but then he jumped on this bare knuckle boxing vibe, and in my mind I'm then thinking, sorry about the noise by the way guys, they're just doing some maintenance work on the office building, so hopefully this will stop in a second. But in my mind I'm thinking, okay, well, he's out of the UFC, maybe USADA's not impacting his life no more, he's only throwing fists, bare knuckle Johny Hendricks, and he's fighting Dakota Cochrane, a guy who's most notable for being on the Ultimate Fighter, and he got a lot of highlight for all the wrong reasons, for his personal reasons, but he was a lightweight fighter. Johny Hendricks, who had just been fighting at middleweight, he fights Dakota Cochrane. I'm expecting to see him flatline him. But no, it's Johny Hendricks that gets flatlined with Dakota Cochrane, and that's absolutely weird to me. Insane. All this shit is insane. It's just not resonating with me. I don't understand what's going on, and it's one of the worst tailspins I've seen in my entire life. Now, this isn't a video where I'm going to be doing the graphics and all the highlights and video. I'm just talking to you guys about something that has been sitting on my mind a lot lately, and with the things, everything quiet in the world of mixed martial arts the way it is, I thought now's a good time to discuss it with you guys. I don't really understand what happened with Johny Hendricks, but it's one of the most shocking declines in mixed martial arts, or downward spirals in mixed martial arts, that I've ever seen, or even in combat sports in general. Johny Hendricks was once a superstar world champion with the vaunted knockout power. The vaunted knockout power went, the discipline went, the mentality went, and he caught loss after loss after loss. It was one of the most difficult things to see, in my opinion. What are your thoughts on this, guys? What are your thoughts on this, guys? And let me know what you thought about this video. It was just really me talking to you guys about the whole situation with Johny Hendricks. It doesn't really resonate to me. It doesn't really make sense to me. I've got my thoughts on it. I would like to know what some of your thoughts are on the decline of Johny Hendricks, and what may have been some of the factors that impacted into his decline. Anyways, comment below. Like the video if you like it. Dislike it if you didn't. My apologies for all the maintenance work going on in the building. I'll still rather get you guys content than not at all. And thank you for watching. I'm Rohan, and this is Mindful Combat.